Hello and good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be back here on this beautiful sunny Friday, or at least where I am, it's nice and sunny. Go ahead and say hello in the chat. I love seeing where everybody's from. I love hearing from you. It makes me feel not quite so alone in my studio like a crazy person talking into a camera. Hopefully, there are more people out there than just my computer machine paying attention to me this morning. Okay, so this morning we are going to continue working on tiling our sphere. Just to review some of the things that we've done in this class so far, we have drawn our sphere and the differentiation between the front plane, ground plane, and back plane. We have worked on our shadow shapes. We learned about the difference between a cast shadow where the light's being interrupted by a form, and a core shadow where the form is actually turning away from the light. If you want more information on that, please check out the cast shadow and form shadow lessons in this series. And then for the last couple days, we've started using a technique called tiling, where we start from the shadow area and work our way to the brightest area of our sphere. So that's what we're going to continue working on today. So this is a little bit more of the meditative part. If you do this in drawing, we call it rendering. I guess it's also considered rendering when you're painting, but you're being methodical, but it takes a lot of brain power. We talked in yesterday's lesson about how it seems so simple, right? We're just going from our dark to our light, but that we have to develop some visual memory in order to do this successfully. Because when we're going from our palette to our canvas, back to our palette, back to our canvas, it's easy to get lost. And then we put the wrong note down. We might put something that's way too dark right in the middle of our light. And then we panic. And then we're like, what do we do? And the next thing you know, we start mushing things around. If there's one thing I want you to pay attention to more than anything else in this demo is how we're seeing each individual, I'm going to try to bring this as close as I can here. Each individual tile, you want each note to be clean and specific. Each tile has its own specific value that needs to be represented when it finally comes onto your canvas there. Okay, so excuse me. It's been 2 weeks and I'm still coughing. I have onions everywhere, don't worry. Somebody told me cut onions and put them out. So I've been doing it. But I don't know, just a weird illness season this year, I think. Okay. Anyways, we're just gonna continue working on our thing. So I have a value scale mixed up on my palette, values 1 through 9. And we talked about this in one of the other lessons too, but some of my piles are a little low. Like my 8 is kind of really low. And if you use up a pile, it's really tempting to be like, oh, this color will do, or this color will do, instead of being the exact color that you actually need it. So if you are running out of paint, part of the discipline that you need to develop as a painter is making sure that you have what you need on your palette, because there's no reason to make it harder. There's no reason to try to mix paint as you go and try to remember where you are on the sphere, especially if you're new to atelier training. It's already hard enough to remember where you are on these things. So I'm going to just mix up a little pile to replace that 8. Do. All right. All right, so did that, and it looks like I also need to replace my 7 a little bit, so I'm gonna mix some more 7. In theory, now that we are tiling, we're gonna be mostly working in our lighter areas, so we shouldn't need quite as much of the darker colors, but if you've ever run out of something in your palette, just be disciplined, just put it back, make more. Okay. Now, I'd like to point out, I don't know how well you can see this. Let's see if I can put it here. This brush is starting to splay a little bit. All right. It's one of my older brushes. I keep having it around. It's been a good brush. It's treated me well. I really don't want to move on from it. But we'll see today how it does, because that splaying is getting to the point where it's going to make it more difficult to tile. So we'll see if it splays too much. I'm going to have to get a replacement brush here. But I think I can get one more day out of it and be okay. And good morning to Carol from Florida, ice in Florida. Who It's just crazy. This is crazy time. I'm glad we're all cuddled into hopefully our homes safely. That we're all in our safe space and ready to paint hopefully, and think about art and find our peace from the craziness outside, in ourselves, in our inner selves. And good morning, Cynthia from Washington. Welcome, welcome. And Peter, happy to see you back. Um, oh, and Peter has some questions. He's been going over the last 2 episodes and he has some questions. Feel free to ask away there. Ellen, good morning in Pennsylvania. And not too far from Magritte. And Leola, welcome, welcome. I'm glad that you like my singing. I think singing is a little generous to call it that. My do 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 do. I have a friend who's like a Broadway person, like actually performs on Broadway, and whenever I'm near him and doing my do to do to do, I always get really like insecure about my do to do to do's. Excuse me. And welcome, Ellen. So good to see you. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just do. I'm going to just continue working. Remember that we're starting from our shadow, working towards our light, and then across the form. Now, when you have something in this stage, I call this the awkward teenager phase, right? Because we're starting to get the form in parts, but we still have empty canvas. Because we have this white canvas, this is feeling really dark, so it might be tempting to start lightening it, but you don't want to make any rash decisions like that until you get it covered. This is a big mistake students make. They like come and look at it and like, it's too dark and I have to change it right now. And you know what? Maybe it is too dark. Maybe on the next pass, we need to lighten it a little bit, but there's no point in making a judgment like that when we are having our thoughts skewed. This is the misinformation. We live in a world of misinformation. The blank canvas is the misinformation. Okay. So don't make any judgments about how right or wrong your sphere is. Do not panic. Be disciplined and get the sphere covered. So we're just going to continue working across this way here. So again, I'm starting in my shadow area. Let me rotate you so that you guys have your better view. Uh-oh, something just, oh, okay. It was just my camera cord. I'm like, uh-oh, there's a ghost in my house. Okay, so Peter is having a question in the chat. He's saying, I'm using the law of has as you suggested and find it applies to going around the sphere edge as well. I'm practicing using a pencil sketch. Does that make sense? Okay, the law of halves, and find it applies to going around the sphere edge as well. I'm not totally sure what you're saying, but it certainly, the values do get darker as you approach the edge of the sphere, because as the sphere turns away from the light, it's turning away from the light in all directions. People can usually see that it's getting darker on the shadow side, but what many people miss is that it's actually getting darker on all the edges, because that's where the form is most turned away. Now, it's disadvantageous in this case to be looking online, because the camera of my computer is unifying all this light. And so it's not showing very well that it is getting darker on the edge. So you're just going to have to be a believer. This is the part where I start running my own cult and I tell you it's there. And even if you don't see it, believe that it's there. Okay. And sometimes if you believe that it's there, then you can start seeing it. And hopefully in your setups at home, if you've spray painted your light bulb and you're looking at it, that you'll be able to see that it is slightly darker on those edges. And if you can't see it yet, that's okay. part of the reason you're training with me, an Atelier trained artist, is that I'm actually changing the way that you see, right? That's what we're doing. We're changing how our sight and our vision works. So even if you don't see it, believe in it first, and then you'll start to see it, right? If you assume it's there, then your eye will start looking for it and will start to find it. I believe too, Leola and Ellen. I believe in fairies. I often call these the fairy values, right? Like I believe in you. I believe in fairies. Who knew? Who knew how silly painting can be sometimes? So Peter, I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to clarify in the chat, and I'll give it another go. Okay, so meanwhile, I'm going to just continue working from my shadow into my light here. So again, I always start by restating the shadow area and then putting a tile on each side to help soften it into the edge. So this is one tile lighter to soften it on this side and one tile lighter on the other. Now keep in mind that the further we get away from the light, the darker it's going to be. So these strips here are our lightest. And then we saw that it got darker because look at this distance, how much longer this distance is compared to this distance. But do you see what's happening now is the distance is starting to grow again. So as this sphere, as we work down our core shadow, we have more distance, which means it's going to stay darker for a little bit longer. I see a lot of people embracing the silliness in the chat. You'll make great students in the online Atelier painting bootcamp. You'll fit right in. Welcome, Eddie. So happy to have you here. Or Edie, I'm so sorry. I think it's Edie. Please let me know if I'm mispronouncing the name. So happy to have you. Okay, so we're just working from dark to light. If we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but there's a rate of change, right? So up here, it's changing slowly. So we spend a lot of time going through just one or two values. And then as the form starts turning faster away from the light, we go through the values faster. So it's not an even rate of change. It's like we're going slowly through from our light. It's taking us like 5 tiles to get from a 1 to a 2. And then all of a sudden, in the same distance, we're going from a 2 to a 9, right? So the rate of change is different. Edie, short for Edith. Wonderful, Edie. So happy to have you here. And apparently, Edie and Peter are already friends. So welcome, friends, to the School of Atelier Arts. So happy to have you here. Yes, and Peter definitely bridging the gap in value. Okay, so I'm going to just continue working from the darks into our lights today. And it's just a little bit darker than what's been painted above it. Because it's traveling a little bit further. And keep in mind too that we're not going across this way. We're going through the highlight. So my line is starting to go this way, and what we want is to go through the highlight. So I need some skinnier shapes here to lead into my highlight. And that feels a touch dark to me, but I don't know. It's supposed to be darker, and it could be my thought on this could be skewed by this white canvas here. So I'm going to leave it because it's in order. And so I'm just going to keep the discipline and see how it goes. And then we get lighter as it approaches the center of our sphere. And it does look like that one swatch was a little too dark. I'm going to finish my thought lightening things towards the center of the sphere here. And then I am going to correct that swatch. Now, I'm trying to see if you can see it. Yes, you can see it in the video. Do you see how I'm breaking the rules? I'm going darker, lighter, 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 dark, light. right? Do you see how this one tile is just out of place? It's ruining the form. And if you squint your eyes, it looks like somebody put a divot in our sphere here. So by not being consistent, we are ruining the form here. So I need to lighten this. In order to lighten it, I need to overshoot how light I actually think it needs to be in order to, because it's going to pick up the color underneath. So this is my guess. And that feels fine, except for now I kind of made a smudge of a dark bit over here. So I need to fix that too. Now be careful. This is a dangerous, dangerous game. As soon as you're like, oh, I just need to fix this little thing and this little thing, it's really easy to start smushing everything around. Okay. So if you're working on a pass, adjust within the pass. If you see things over here, like I see that there's another tiny little dark bit over here, but don't go into that right now. That's second pass stuff. Okay. Because the next thing you know, you're going to be hopping around all over your painting. And for those of you who are in the online Atelier Painting Bootcamp, the online school that I run where we meet twice a week and I coach you through your painting, you'll know that hopping around is a source of doom. Hopping around is for finishing passes, not first passes. um, okay. And there's some great commentary in the chat right now that I want to address. So working with the tile size, yes, it's common to go too big or too small. If you go too big, then you're basically making too big of change in values because your tiles are so big. If you're too small, you can need like 100 steps between every value, and that can get really tricky and hard to achieve successfully. So definitely you want a brush and a tile size that's proportionate to the size that you're working. If you're working on a sphere this big, then you need a small brush. If you're working on a head-sized sphere, you need a much bigger brush than this. I see all the friends in the chat. Lisa, it's not just you, but I love you. And oh, I love this. I love this whole community in here. It's so wonderful to see, we've only been doing this for a couple weeks, and it's so joyful to see everybody getting to know each other and learning together. I love this. Okay, so Peter has a great question. So he's going to be finished with the pencil sketch. Is there a way to show you the result? That is what the online Atelier Painting Bootcamp is. Unfortunately, I get so many messages daily. I cannot respond to everybody, but when you join the bootcamp, you have access to my feedback, coaching, training 2 times a week. Plus, you can also send things to me. So in our online painting bootcamp, we have an app as well. And so let's say you're, out and about, you can still get your critiques, just sign in through the app. Let's say you can't attend the critique that day at all. You can leave me a message in the chat or on the chat board and get a critique that way. But unfortunately, it's a boundary for me that I cannot offer individual critiques to students outside of the bootcamp. So I think you'd be a wonderful student for that bootcamp. You're clearly very dedicated and showing up every day here and doing the work. So I hope you'll consider joining us in the online bootcamp. Okay, so just continuing on. So I made it through the center, and now I'm going through the lightest part and across to the back side here. So now I'm doing basically the opposite. I'm starting with my lightest and going to my shadow. Okay. This one got a little crooked. Do you see how I kind of did a little loopy thing here, but that's fine. We're going to go across this way. And I realized I lost my train of thought because I was still trying to fix this one thing without hopping around everywhere. So let me do that because it's making me crazy. But just one, bootcamp students that are hoppy prone, just one, because it's on the path that we're currently working on. Some students like rules more than others, but I think a good general rule is you fix what's on the path that you're working. If you catch it while you're working on the path, if you don't catch it until later, then it's a second pass problem. Okay. All right, so I'm continuing to work across here. And just going slightly darker, again, this far edge gets darker as it gets further away from the light source. And the rate of change, again, changes much more quickly as we approach this edge. Also, it's a little bit darker up here because it's a little bit further away from the light than this side. So I know it's silly, but there's so many applications if you can keep in your head that the closer something is to the light source, the brighter it is, the further away, the darker it is, right? And this part of our edge is further away from the light source than this part of the edge. So it's going to be the slightest bit darker. Now, again, I'm about to approach this edge, which means I need to go to my smaller brush. Well, Peter, we're going to miss you for the next 2 months while you're away. We look forward to your return. Um, and let's see. And same to you, Ellen. It'd be delightful to see you when you guys are ready. I find that there's like a moment where students, are finally ready. Sometimes it's like they have some traveling to do, or they're waiting for a kid to graduate high school. A lot of the people in our boot camp, have been painters or worked on their art their whole life, but they felt like there was this moment where they could really dedicate it more seriously. So sometimes that's when a kid leaves the house. Sometimes it's a career change. Sometimes it's retirement. Sometimes it's a midlife crisis. All of you are welcome into our boot camp. Um, sometimes it's college students. Some of my earlier classes were frustrated college students that felt like they wanted to learn this skill set and it wasn't necessarily available to them. Their college professors didn't necessarily have this skill set to teach them. And that's true for all of you. If you've tried to learn to paint before and weren't successful, pay very careful attention to what teachers you're training with, because, it makes me really sad when I see people who think that they aren't capable of learning this. Anybody's capable of learning this. You just need an instructor that has this particular training. And I myself, I worked really hard, in my, K-12 career and my college career. And I thought that I just didn't have it because I wasn't getting closer to these types of results. But the real problem was that I was training with people that didn't have this particular knowledge. So how could they possibly teach it to me, right? But I took the burden on me. I thought that I just wasn't capable. And it's really a shame that people are out there in the world thinking, oh, well, I took an art class once and it didn't work out and I must not have it. Like, no, that's not it. That's not true at all. Anybody can learn this. Can you imagine if your math teacher was like, oh, you can't do calculus already? I'm not going to teach you how to add, right? Like, anybody can learn this. It's just you need to train with somebody that has this knowledge. And unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, which you can hear me rant about on podcasts, I have one linked in the community of the School Atelier Arts community. There's a lot of reasons why this training fell out of favor. But the really cool thing is that you found it. Like, here you are. There are maybe a few thousand people in the world that can teach you these skills, and you found one. That's amazing. So the hard work is over. Now you just gotta put in the hours to get the training, but you can do it. Anybody can do it. I somehow have managed to make a mess on my hands. Is that paint or is that fireplace soot? Another reason I'm really excited to have a fireplace is that traditionally lamp black was made from burning oil in like the old school oil lamps. And I'm curious if the soot from my fireplace will achieve a similar result. So I'm going to start running some experiments because it's supposedly a warmer black than, some of the ivory blacks and the traditional blacks that you can get. So I'm really curious if I can. All right. Now I have ranted and raved at all of you. If you get paint on your hand, go wash your hands. It's really important that you keep your hands clean, because as soon as you get paint on your hand, then all of a sudden it gets on your computer and then it gets on this and this and this. And it's so important to me that my students develop safe studio practices. So even though I really don't want to, I'm going to take a minute and go wash my hands. Okay, I made a big girl choice. I washed my hand. I feel much better about being a good role model for all of you. Okay. Oh, Peter's saying that wood ash is not the same as oil residue. Darn. I guess I'm gonna have to get oil lamps. Um, See, I love having such a great community like this because there are some people that are really, really knowledgeable about materials, and some people that are really knowledgeable about techniques, and some people that are really knowledgeable about teaching the techniques or whatever. And I love that we all come together and are able to create more for all of us with our knowledge base. So thanks for sharing. Thank you, Leola. I hope you join in the future too with the online painting boot camp. It's really amazing. I love the group of people in there. They're a lot like you guys. That's why I'm like, you guys should join. All right. And the other thing about the painting boot camp is it really allows for me to offer these free classes, right? So it's this balance back and forth to I of course want to provide as much free content and knowledge as I can out there in the world. I want anybody looking for this to be able to take steps forward in their art. And really our painting boot camp students fuel that ability for me to do that. So kudos to the boot camp students. um, Okay, so I am going through the highlight and then back across the other side here. And this one got a little wonky. So on this next pass, I want to be more mindful about heading straight for the highlight and going through, which won't be hard because I really only need like a few tiles here and like a couple tiles here for this next pass just to get us back on track here. All right, so again, I'm starting. All right, so I'm starting in my shadow. Now, we talked about this early on. Let me rotate you guys back. We talked about this early on, but when we drew this core shadow, we drew it like this, and then we stopped because what we said is that there's so much bouncing light coming back in here that it dissolves down here. So that means that this edge is even whiter and softer as it comes around. So I've allowed it to stay somewhat sharp-ish. I mean, it's still a soft edge, but it's sharper up here, but it's really going to start dissolving down here. So I'm going to allow that dissolution to be whiter at the bottom here. Oops, that was maybe too aggressive. We'll see. Sometimes I get really excited about a concept and I exaggerate it. And then also as a teacher, when I'm correcting students, especially in the online painting boot camp, often I find that if I over exaggerate the corrections, the students tend to under exaggerate the corrections. So I've developed this habit of being just a little bit of an exaggerator because then students land in the right place, right? If I say darken it by 2 steps, it's really hard for them to darken it by 2 steps and they'll darken it 1. So if I actually want them to darken it 2 steps, I'll tell them to darken it 3 steps and then they'll land on the 2, right? So sometimes exaggeration I find is a teaching tool that I use a lot. And sometimes I forget that when I'm demoing that I don't need to necessarily exaggerate. Thank you, Ellen. Ellen saying that I fine tune this, Mandy. I try. I care a lot about teaching. My background's in teaching, my degree is in teaching. It really matters to me to be efficient in how I'm sharing information and to give enough information to challenge you, but not overwhelm you. So there's something in teaching theory called the zone of cognitive development, which is just a fancy way of saying when your brain hurts just a little bit, but you're excited because you're kind of getting it, almost, you're on the cusp of getting it. That's where I try to keep my students as much as possible because that means I'm challenging them just enough that they'll progress, but not so much that they shut down. Oh, thanks, Ellen. Okay. So anyways, we're softening this edge and I'm starting to get lost. Do you see how I'm starting to travel? And the next thing you know, I'm going to do this and that's going to ruin all my hard work. So instead of doing this, what I'm going to do is find one tile that's between this value and that value and leave it be. So this is how you stop yourself from doing something you shouldn't be doing. So, oh, except that's too light. I'm going to go down a rabbit hole. If it's too light, you have to exaggerate it slightly too dark because it's going to mix with the light underneath. Okay, and then I'm going to get one more tile in here just to connect it with what's nearby. All right, and I'm going to leave it be. Is it perfect? No, but this is second pass stuff, not what we're worrying about right now. Okay. All right, so pulling out of my shadow here. I do encourage you, maybe you're not ready to join the boot camp right now, but if you, getting feedback is important. So if you're not in the boot camp, you need to figure out how to give feedback to yourself. One of the ways that we can do that is called having an innocent eye, right? So turn it upside down. That'll help you see it in a new way. Look at it in a mirror so that it's flipping it in reverse. That'll give you a new way of seeing it. All right. And then I need at least one more tile to knit this together here. People, when they join the boot camp, they think that I'm going to teach them how to make art. And of course, that's what I want for them. But what I'm really teaching them is how to teach themselves, right? Giving them the techniques, the checks, the balances, the processes that they can produce a consistently strong technical result every time. My true goal for my students is independence from me, right? So, giving them the techniques that they need to eventually become independent. And, to me, I don't care what my students paint. I just want them to be able to paint whatever they want without compromise because they didn't have the skill to do it, right? So, to me, I see myself as somebody that provides a hammer, a screwdriver, wood, nails, whatever, and you can build any house you want with it. But you'll never not be able to build the house you intend because you didn't have the right tool for the job. So Peter's asking a great question. What's the objective for the second pass? That's a really good question. I really want to answer it, but I'm afraid if I answer that right now, that is going to derail what we should be thinking about right now. So let's finish the first pass, and then I'll spend a whole lot of time talking about the objectives for the second pass. Sorry, I know that's a dissatisfying answer. Okay, I'm going to continue working. Poor Peter, I just keep telling him no today. You're a good sport. So I'm going to continue going, from this shadow through the light. And you can see that I've kind of straightened up this area a little bit. So this next pass should be a little bit more straightforward. It's not that you can't handle it yet, Ellen. It's that we still have a lot of thinking to do here before we move on to the next thing. As a teacher, I feel like it's kind of crazy, like how much you have to control information and when and how you give it, because there's a lot of great information that will be the right time for you to have access to, but without the underpinnings of it, it could hurt you, right? It could hurt your thinking or disrupt the thinking I'm trying to teach you now. Thanks, Ellen. Yes, Corinne, there's so much to learn. There really is. But I tell this to my students in the online painting boot camp too. We were talking about, I'm teaching you how to learn. And Da Vinci, I think he was 80 when he said this, but he said, if only I had 80 years, then I could really learn how to draw. Right. So on one hand, that can feel demoralizing, like, oh, will I ever have enough time to draw? But on the other hand, I think what he's really saying is that art is a journey and it can be mined endlessly. Like you will never be bored when you have atelier training, because what you really discover is how much you don't know. And then there's like a million paths open to you that you can pursue the rest of your life. Oh, Hokusai said something similar, according to Corinne. That's great. If you have a link or a quote for that, please leave it in the chat. I mean, anybody that pursues art seriously, and I consider you guys all amongst those people, because you don't watch 10 hours on painting a sphere. We're on hour 10, right? If you're not serious. So you guys are serious students. You're more serious than 99% of art students out there. And, try to embrace the journey, right? Like sometimes students are like, tiling, I hate tiling. It's a sphere, it's not real art. I want to make real art. But really, the journey here and the artistry is developing your technique and your abilities so that you can paint any form really beautifully in the future. Um, okay. Okay, so I see a little bit of commentary in the chat. So with oils and acrylics and different brands of things, I would like to point out something about oils versus acrylics, which is the pigment is the same between oils and acrylics. What's different is the binder. So oil paint is pigment that is clumped together, like it adhered together through oil. Acrylic is holding all those little pieces of pigment together through essentially plastic, right? So there are advantages and disadvantages to each, but the pigment itself is not necessarily different. The oil in oil paint is a vegetable oil most often, right? Like a linseed oil or walnut oil. Whereas plastics have a lot of things in them that we don't know a ton about. And also with the concern of microplastics, being in every part of our bodies, apparently, I feel strongly about trying to limit plastics. And so, if there's a health reason to use acrylics over oils, that's something to consider for sure. But I find that most of the people that have difficulty with oils have difficulty with oils in particular with asthma or other things because of the turpentines. And that's why I teach direct painting. I've not added anything to my paint. This is just pure oil paint, a brush on canvas. I don't wash my brushes with solvents anymore. I just stick them into a little pool of oil overnight, right? So I now have no solvents in my practice unless I occasionally thin paint to draw with on canvas. That's the only time I ever use a solvent. And by eliminating solvents, you're eliminating a lot of that airborne scent that can cause problems with oil painting. So if you tried oil painting in the past, I encourage you to try it a way that doesn't use solvents and see if that's different for you. But of course, please see your doctor. SIA is not responsible for any safety or medical choices. You make in your own studio. But there's a lot of misinformation about safety around oil paints. And so just be mindful of what part of what painting is actually causing you difficulties. Um, okay. Yeah. I know, right? Like, because oil painting fell out of favor for the last 100 years, people, now that they're picking it back up, often, put all sorts of additives or things in the paint, and it doesn't need to be there, especially if you're direct painting. Now, you can't glaze this way necessarily. Scumbling is considered a glaze depending on who you talk to. You can scumble without additives to your paint. But I just try so hard to develop a process that's easy for students, that's the most straightforward, that they don't need 100 pieces of supplies for. Like in the painting boot camp, we have 5 colors that you use, and you rarely need a color outside of those 5 colors. We don't have additives in the paint. It's direct painting, tiling, form painting, wipeouts, that kind of thing that aren't actually using additives to the paint. Okay, that was a little side adventure. I'm going to continue painting because we're never going to finish this if I keep yapping. All right. All right, again, it's much more spread at the bottom because so much more bouncing light. And the core shadow is actually lightening a little bit too. You can see that I'm using about a half step lighter here than I was up here. And again, allowing it to be a much fuzzier edge. Oh, so Edie has a scientific explanation for us about acrylics. She's saying that acrylics are composed of millions of bits of plastic suspended in water, and as the water evaporates, the vacuum pressure presses the pieces together so hard they melt together where they touch. I had no idea that's how acrylic worked. Thus forming a solid but porous film. That's really good information. Okay, I had no idea. I don't bother to learn a lot about acrylic paint because I don't use it, but I really love understanding how the different paints work. Okay, so continue. Focus, Mandy. All right. You can tell that I'm feeling a little bit rushed. Can anybody tell me what sign they see that I might be feeling a little bit rushed? Any ideas? Because we have to know our warning signs, right? When we're getting off the track. So do you see how big this tile just suddenly got compared to how big my other tiles are? That tells me that I am like getting rushed and I need to slow down, go back to my process, do one tile at a time. Um, and Ellen, yeah, I probably need to rename the last 3 videos because they all say tiling/form painting part 1, part 2, part 3. So they're very similar titles. If anybody has any suggestions to name it more clearly in the chat that they're 3 different episodes, let me know. All right, so going to a smaller tile, a not rushed tile. You know, this can happen to anybody. I'm a pretty experienced painter, right? And I was getting tile exhaustion. I started making big tiles. All right, and then of course, connecting back through the other side. Oops, that one's slightly out of order. It was supposed to be darker and it just kind of stayed the same. So that's an easier fix because I can just overlap a little bit more my next color. Oh, and I'm starting to go to big tiles again. Be disciplined, Mandy. I think because it's Friday. Um, so I'm going to put this in, but I need to switch to my small brush because we're getting close to this edge here. Another reason that my tiles might be getting bigger is because we talked about this when we started today, but my brush is starting to get old and a little bit flayed on the edges. So it's probably time to replace it, but I'm trying to get a few more sessions out of it. All right, I accidentally just went over my line here. Whenever you lose your edge, it's important to restate it. Now, earlier we were asking, what do you think about on the second pass? One of the things that we can start doing on the second pass is softening different edges. Right now, it's a pretty hard edge all the way around because we're worried about losing the form while we're doing the tiling. Once the tiling is established, then we can start losing some edges without panicking so much. Oh, Peter has a great suggestion in the chat. So he's suggesting that in order to keep the tiles the same size, could you draw on here? And I do have students that will, especially on a sphere project, like kind of make lines to follow, and that helps them. It is a training project. So even if your lines show through, you know, the risk is that your lines are going to show through, especially in your lighter areas. But if you think of it as this is a training project, this is a student project, that's a totally valid thing to do, especially if it helps you stay on track. Absolutely. Good idea. Oh, okay. Thanks, Ellen. Oh, yeah, I misunderstood you. Ellen was talking about the tiles, not the video, not the video titles. She was referring to the tiles, and I misunderstood. I think, sometimes my insecurities will come out, right? Like this is my first time live streaming on my own channel this way. And like many of you, maybe while you're doing your sphere, you might be asking yourself, is this right? Did I do this right? Should I change this? What about this? Right. And so I think I'm in that headspace with these streaming videos because I'm like, oh, am I doing it right? Did I title it wrong? Can people find it? Do they like it? I don't know. Right. So my apologies for my insecurity, Ellen. Okay, I am going to continue. Now, it's going to get trickier here because the core shadow here is dissolving so much that it becomes really wide by this part of the sphere. And there isn't as clear of a delineation between what is our core shadow, what's on the shadow side, and what's the light side. Because what's happening is that this transition that used to be really skinny is getting wider. And by the time it gets down here, it's going to be almost this wide, right? I'm going to move my fingers from your point of view, right? So it's like this edge is thin here. Let me get the paintbrush out of my hand. This edge is thin here. And then as it gets here, it's a little bit wider. As it gets here, it's a little bit wider. And by the time it gets all the way down here, this edge is going to be wider without a clear definition between light and shadow. Okay, so Vanessa's suggesting in the chat that water-based oil paints are a good choice for people that have allergies to traditional oil paints. I have not I have not experimented with that, so I can't speak to that. But for those of you who struggle with allergies or other health symptoms with oil paint, that's something to check out. Oh, thanks, Magritte. I love having you here to start my day too. I don't know. I am not one of those painters that likes to be alone in my studio, even when I'm not, teaching online or streaming online. Like I like to have friends in my studio while I paint. I like to talk while I paint. I don't know. It just helps me think. I don't like being alone in my studio. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to just again work across here. We have a little bit of time. So here's the thing. I'm like, ooh, I have like 10 minutes to paint, right? But if I think like that, I'm going to start rushing to finish this whole rest of the sphere. I need to not have it in my head, oh, I'm going to finish the sphere in 10 minutes. That's a recipe for disaster and making bad choices. What I do want to think is just maintaining, okay, let's do the next strip, right? And if there's time for another strip, we'll do the next strip. Okay, so Edie's saying that she went to a talk by art conservators who were really against the use of water-soluble oils. Did they say why, Edie? Do you know anything about that? Or if you happen to remember the name of the conservators that we could go write them and ask them. I'm starting to make big tiles again, so I'm going to be mindful. I'm feeling the pressure, right? The class is about to end. I really wanted to get this covered today, and I didn't quite get that far. But I just have to be disciplined. Like it is what it is. We'll get through this painting at whatever pace we get through this painting, and that's fine. Okay, so Edie's saying that if she remembers correctly, that the water-soluble oils delaminate more easily and don't last as long on the support. Okay, so Magritte, I'm not really maintaining it all the way to the edge. It may look like that right now, but what's really going to happen is that by my final pass, it's going to continue to spread. And I haven't really transitioned on the other side of this yet either. So it will, even transitioning it on this side is going to start to dissolve it. I'm really going to worry more about the core shadow on the second pass. Right now, it's there for us as a tool to get from dark to light, as a division between our shadow. But it's really on our next pass that we're really going to focus on making sure this core shadow dissolves and is defined where we need it. I have been painting a little thickly. This is also a sign that I'm feeling rushed. And so you don't want it to dry with edges kind of raised, because when you go to your second pass, those edges are going to catch the light no matter what color you change them to. So I need to take a minute here and just knock back some of these edges. And I'm starting to make a mess because I knocked it back with the wrong color paint on my brush. And now I need to make a slight adjustment. There we go. And I see an edge here I need to knock back. All right. So as you paint, you will start to find your warning signs, right? Like for me, my warning signs are my tiles get big and I put too much paint on. That's a sign that I'm not doing good thinking, that I'm rushing. Okay. So everybody has different warning signs. Some painters are just naturally just more controlling and obsessive and won't have those as their warning signs, but their warning signs is that they're going to get drawn into a little area without thinking about how it relates to the whole, right? So if you are the kind of personality that's like very detail focused or whatever, you're probably not going to make too big of tiles and you're probably not going to put too much paint on your tiles, but you probably are going to put the wrong values down because you're going to look really carefully and obsessively in one area without thinking about whether it's the right value to the whole. So if you're an obsessive kind of painter, your job is to make sure that you're looking holistically. If you're more of a aggressive painter, I would consider myself an aggressive painter, then my warning signs are too much paint and big tiles. It was lovely having you, Edie. I am going to stop here for today because I'm starting to rush, right? So I'm also going to call it for today. And in our next class, so we don't have the live streaming on the weekend, but starting on Monday, I don't want to say for sure we're going to get it covered, but I think it's possible we might get it covered by Monday. So finishing our first pass on this project. Okay. And Leo, me too. I have to remind myself not to rush all the time. It's better to just start again the next day, especially if you're getting tired and want to be done. Absolutely. If you have those feelings, that's a sign to stop this project, maybe start a second project if you still want to be in the studio, or call it for the day. All right, Ellen. Yay. Yes, I'll be back Monday too. I can't wait to see everybody. Again, my name is Mandy Tice. For those of you who don't know me, I run the School of Atelier Arts. I run an online art atelier. I hope you'll consider joining us there. It's called Atelier Painting Bootcamp. And we also have worksheets on our website. So if you're trying to practice like a specific skill, so we have color theory worksheets that help you like really practice seeing smaller increments of color. We have portrait drawing worksheets available that help you practice orienting the face and getting better at getting believable portraits. And we also have a figure drawing set available to you as well. So I hope you'll check them out. Thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you on Monday. Have a great weekend.